Hello and welcome. Today I'd like to come back to my to-do box, which is full of dead hardware waiting for repair. And today's star of the video is this ISA sound card made by Aztech. The model is Sound Galaxy Basic 16, and this card is not only Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 compatible, but also has an unusual feature. Aztech sound cards were quite famous in the early 90s. The cards were rebranded and many times sold in OEM machines, for example by Packard Bell. The cards were not outstanding in point of quality, but especially in the earlier time, Aztech always added some unique features which did put it over the competition. And this card is no exclusion. As I said, it is a Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 compatible. That means that the card should have a Yamaha YMF262 FM chip, also known as OPL3. However, on this card we don't see such chip, but it has this mystical LS212 chip in the middle. This is actually a clone of the Yamaha chip, and it sounds so much like the original that I would say that this is a relabeled YMF262. Many sound cards manufacturers used such clones in their cards to avoid license payments on Yamaha. Like Creative Sound Blaster Pro, also this card has a DSP chip here in the corner. It is basically an Intel 8051 compatible microcontroller which probably contains the reversed engineered firmware of the original Sound Blaster Pro 2.0. Now we come to some features which Creative Sound Blaster Pro didn't offer. First of all, this analog device's AD1848 chip, which provides Windows sound system compatibility and 16-bit stereo sound. And above that, this Aztech custom chip, which emulates a parallel port with attached Disney Sound Source sound card. So this card supports two more sound systems, which Creative Sound Blaster Pro didn't provide. Windows sound system started to find its way on many sound cards back then, but especially Disney Sound Source was a very exotic feature. Usefulness on a Sound Blaster compatible card is probably debatable. There were around 150 games with Disney Sound Source support, but most supported also Sound Blaster. There were, however, some games which supported Disney Sound Source only. I can think of Arachnophobia, but maybe you know more? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, this card is a nice exemplar which supports 3 sound systems, and that makes it unique. That's why I would like to have it in my collection. Unfortunately, this card is dead. As I got this card, both voltage regulators were missing. One should deliver 5 volts for the digital part and another 9 volts for the amplifier. Probably someone previously tried to repair this card or used it as a donor. I added the missing regulators, but they didn't deliver the required voltage, and I put the card into my to-do box for another day. And this day is today, so let's see what's going on here. So the mentioned voltage regulators are regulating 12 volts down to 5 volts and 9 volts respectively. So both regulators should be connected to 12 volt pin on the ISA bus. The related plus 12 volt pin on the ISA bus is B9. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 7 must be minus 12 volts. Once again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, this is our plus 12 volts. Let's see. It goes through a wire to the other side. But there is no connection to the regulator pins. Okay, here we have the connection to the plus 12 on the ISA connector. And here we go. This ferrite bead seems to be dead. There is no continuity. We have our culprit, I guess. This ferrite bead is basically an inductor and is a part of a filter on the plus 12 volts rail. The bead on the minus 12 volts rail right from it seems to be okay. Yeah, but 12 volts plus is gone. Let's see, do we have a connection to the regulators? Yeah, here the input on the 9 volts regulator and the input on 5 volts regulator too. so FB7 has to be replaced. Now the question, why did that die? Let me check the regulator and if it has a short to the ground. Yep, there is a short. When measuring for a short, always double check the resistance. It has to be nearly zero. Yes, we are getting 0.5 ohms. That is definitely a short. So, what happened to this sound card? I think something has been shorted and unlimited current went through FB7. It overheated and died. So FB7 is not the main culprit. I guess someone who tried to repair it found that there is a short on the regulators. Probably assumption was made that at least one of the regulators is shorted, and after one regulator has been removed, the short didn't gone. So the other one had to go too, but the short remained and the repair attempt was aborted. As I then got the card, I didn't check for shorts, just blindly installed two new regulators and they are definitely alright. So the short is somewhere else. Those decoupling tantalum capacitors are always a good spot to look at. They really like to short, especially on 12 volts rails. Let's check. Yep, one capacitor is shorted to ground. Let me cut one leg and see if the short disappears. And it's gone. The capacitor is toast. Let's replace the capacitor and the ferrite bead and see if the card awakens. I don't know exact parameters of the burnt ferrite bead and could actually solder just a wire, but let's pretend to do it the right way. I have one ferrite bead here from scrap, which is slightly smaller, but is from a 12 volts rail of a notebook mainboard. This should do the job as well. So, a capacitor is also in place. Time to test the card. The system posts, that is a good sign, means we have no obvious shorts on the card which would shut down the PSU. Let's check the voltages. 12 volts input, 9 volts output, nice. 12 volts input, 5 volts output. That looks promising. Okay, let's check if we get some sound out of it. Another outstanding feature of this card was that it was completely software configurable and though didn't need any driver or software. I'll come back to it in a moment, but for now let's still check out the accordant software. The installation is straightforward, though the software mentions a MIDI port and MIDI interrupt, which are actually the usual Sound Blaster settings, but for some reasons Aztech decided to call everything Sound Blaster related as MIDI and Windows sound system as Wave. Whatever, there are multiple utilities supplied by Aztech and those names are called differently everywhere, what is a bit confusing. But if you ever manage to set up a sound card in DOS, you will know what those settings actually mean. After the installation, which is made from 3 floppies, some settings are written into the AutoExec.bat and config.sys files and the system can be rebooted. In the installation folder you can find some drivers for the CD-ROM interface which can be used to access Sony, Mitsumi or Panasonic drives. Also there are some MIDI drivers which seem to be used by Voetra software, but they are still a bit of mystery to me. Then there is a utility directory which is the most interesting part here. It contains some programs for Windows like setup.exe, but most other utilities are for DOS. For example, hwset.exe, which is a hardware setup utility. As I said, this card can be used without drivers because the card has a built-in EEPROM where configuration can be stored. So the card can self-initialize with the settings previously stored there. The utility can be used directly from the command line to write the settings into the EEPROM or by using sgp16fig.exe, which provides a slightly better user interface where settings can be set using a menu. Once the settings are selected, the software asks if they shall be stored. This is basically the point where they get written into the EEPROM. To make it possible, one driver has to be loaded, though in the config sys. The driver is called eeprom.sys and is included in the drivers directory of the sound card software. This driver is only needed to be able to write the settings into the card's EEPROM. Once the card is configured, none of that is needed anymore. After a reboot, a provided test utility as g3.exe can be used to validate the settings. And we have a working FM sound. Great! Digital 8-bit sound seems not to work. But 16-bit sound works, which works through Windows Sound System. Remember, Sound Blaster Pro was not 16-bit compatible.
Sound Galaxy brings you into a realm of fantastic sounds.
The input and external MIDI I will not test now, since there are currently no external devices. Okay, sound works to some extent. Now let's get real and check Wolfenstein 3D. And here you see why I have chosen this game to try first. Not only does it detect Sound Blaster, it also reports sound source device, Disney sound source to be precise. Nice, FM sound works so far. Let's check out the sound settings. Here you can see that for digital sound we can select between Sound Blaster and Disney sound source. Sound Blaster has potentially better audio quality, but it is still interesting to see both options here. Let's leave it at Sound Blaster for now. Yep, digital sound works too. Let's hear the door closing. There it is. Often if there is an IRQ conflict or the settings are wrong, you don't hear the sound of closing doors here. And in this case everything seems to be fine. Okay, here once again how it sounds using Sound Blaster. Let's switch to Disney sound source. There is definitely a slight difference. Actually, Sound Blaster was able to output with up to 22 kHz, but for performance reasons, memory and disk space, games of that age usually used 11 kHz samples. Disney sound source outputs with 7 kHz, which is not a huge but definitely audible difference. Another game where Disney sound source can be used for digital sound is Prince of Persia. I believe you need at least version 1.3 to be able to use it. Here in the setup you can select Disney sound source and it gives a list of parallel ports to select from. Original Disney sound source was an external device connected to a parallel port. The Aztech Sound Galaxy Basic 16 emulates a parallel port for that reason, but I'm not sure which one. Let's try LPT3. FM sounds okay. Digital sound is distorted, but audible. I would expect no sound at all if the wrong parallel ports would be selected in the setup. But let's try another port though. Let's go with LPT2. Oh, much better. This is how Disney Sound Source sounds. Let's compare it with Sound Blaster. So, if you watched my old video about the silly Sound Bastard, a Covox speech thing clone, you maybe remember that Disney Sound Source and Covox speech thing are quite similar devices. Disney Sound Source has a buffer which makes the playback less jittery, but limits the sample rate to 7 kHz. Covox speech thing, on the other hand, is able to play with higher sample rates, but has no buffer, so the playback timing can jitter dependent on the CPU load. Nonetheless, Disney Sound Source and Covox speech thing are very similar, and so Aztech provides a utility to switch the sound cards between Disney Sound Source and Covox speech thing modes. I will not show how that sounds. If you are interested, consider to watch my video about the Silly Sound Bastard project. That's also quite entertaining. As you saw in my previous videos, I like to use this setup to test sound cards, because it has so many options. For some reasons, it auto-detects this sound card as Sound Blaster 16, and it couldn't be further away, so the settings have to be set manually. Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 does the trick.
0, 0, 0.
Everything works, and I show it now because I would also like to test the Windows sound system. Here it is called Microsoft Sound System, but that's the same. The port is set to 530. That's, by the way, cannot be set per software and has to be set using jumpers directly on the card.
0, 0, 0. 0, 0. 0.
And here we go, 16-bit sound. In this case, sound the same as 8-bit, but the point is that the path is possible at all. So this card can not only do 8-bit in Sound Blaster Pro compatibility, but also 16-bit as Windows sound system. And all that aside of Disney Sound Source respective Covox speech thing. Quite an interesting selection. Although, to be honest, once the card has Sound Blaster compatibility, there is no real point for Disney Sound Source, because there were barely games out there which had Disney Sound Source support but no Sound Blaster support. I mentioned Arachnophobia previously. Hear how it sounds with PC speaker. The intro doesn't sound too bad actually. The game was an adaptation of a Disney movie of the same name and is quite funny, if you are not afraid of too many spiders. The story is simple. After an invasion of spiders, you were hired to exterminate them and their queen. After a copy protection screen, where you have to tell which spider is shown on which page in the manual, you get directly into the game, where you drive from house to house, enter each one and clean them from spiders. The controls are a bit cumbersome, but once you get used to it, the game makes fun. I never played it before and I tried it first time as I prepared this video. In the game you have a gas bottle which you can use as a gun to kill the spiders. You also have a gas bomb to exterminate many at once in one room. Also you can collect items like first aid or improvement for the gas gun, making it to a flamethrower for a while. And once you found and exterminated a spider queen in one town, you move to the next one. When playing the game with just a PC speaker, the sound effects are very limited. The game is almost silent all the time, you just hear the gas shots and some beep effects, nothing exciting. and having a Sound Blaster card would not make it any better, since this game doesn't support it. However, probably because this game comes from Disney, it supports Disney Sound Source, and you need that to fully enjoy the game. Unfortunately, it didn't detect the Aztech sound cards out of the box, but in the manual I found that the game can be forced to switch into the Disney Sound Source by adding on to the executable. And here how the intro sounds with the Disney Sound Source. In the game itself, you also get digital sound effects like driving car, footsteps, and silly comments from Dilbert McClintock, which you control.
The cavalry has arrived!
When you are in the house, you also can hear sounds from other rooms, birds and horses outside. It's much better experience which Sound Blaster users couldn't get. You needed a Disney Sound Source or such an Aztech Sound Galaxy.
Sit on it, Tuffet. Oh! Let's bug out of here!
Well, the card works, marvelous, but the regulators get quite hot, to be honest. So let's add some thermal grease and screw the regulators to the PCB. This way it should hopefully better dissipate the heat. To keep the screws tight in place, I'll add a drop of nail varnish to each one. Theoretically, I could add heat spreaders to the regulators, but original card didn't have any, so I'll leave it as is. So, here it is, a working Aztech Sound Galaxy Basic 16. As I said, a nice card with some interesting extras. Not only is it Sound Blaster Pro 2.0 compatible, it also supports Windows Sound System and Disney Sound Source. Actually a perfect sound card for an early 90s DOS gaming PC. And this card could be even better. You see this wavetable header? It is an early version, but actually pin compatible to the normal wavetables as they have been used on many sound cards later. I have here an Aztec wavetable which fits here like a glove, even the holes for the standoffs. With a wavetable, this card could theoretically even support general MIDI in addition to all the other systems, right? Unfortunately, that would be too good to be true. This sound card is not MPU 401 compatible, and so general MIDI doesn't work in DOS on this card. It works on Windows though, but for Windows there are better alternatives. This card is really nice for DOS, and such a wavetable would be a great upgrade. I tried to play with SoftMPU, a tool which emulates MPU 401, but without any success. The only place where I could get wavetable sound in DOS on this card was the Aztec test utility. When I selected MIDI output, it actually played some piano notes, which definitely came from the wavetable. The big question would be if it is possible to redirect somehow MPU401 requests into the Aztech custom circuitry. That would probably need some investigation. Furthermore, I have more very similar Aztech sound cards in my to-do box. They all have the same list of features and also a wavetable headers. Maybe I can convince one of those to play also general MIDI in DOS. But the cards are all not working and need a treatment. So if you are interested, join me soon in the next video. And so far, this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this resurrection. Thank you for watching and goodbye.